Hello, and welcome to this music lesson. My name is Sam Irvin, and I'm here in my capacity as teaching artist with Leaf to talk to you about music theory in the Western tradition through the lens of classical guitar. I'll be writing a little piece of music, and we'll use that as an example to talk about the building blocks of music, the systems of organization that we use to take a bunch of notes and turn them into something musical, and maybe a little bit of the science of sound. This is part of the May 2020 Virtual Leaf Festival. I'm broadcasting out of my home to all of you around the world. Hopefully you'll learn something from this video, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. That was a lot of notes, but each individual note was just a vibration. Just like the words coming out of my mouth are vibrations, traveling through the air, or actually making the air vibrate, and eventually reaching a microphone that transmits those vibrations into electrical impulses. Your eardrums do the same thing. They take vibrations in the air. Those vibrations wiggle your eardrum, and your brain transforms them into electrical impulses that allow you to understand or perceive sound or hear music. There are 4 measurable variables of sound, or 4 ways you could measure the different aspects of a vibration. Duration has to do with how short or long a note is. In other words, when does the note start and when does the note stop? Everything must have a beginning and an end. And we could measure duration in terms of seconds or minutes, like we do time itself, right? But in music, usually we measure the duration of a note in relation to a beat. The beat in a song is usually what you're nodding your head or tapping your foot to. And we could count how many beats a note takes. 1, 2, 3, 4. That note was 4 beats long. We'll get to other rhythmic devices here in a bit. Volume has to do with how quiet or loud a sound is. In music, we say piano to describe something quiet, or forte to describe loud. You could also measure volume in decibels, which has to do with the pressure created by the compression and rarefaction of vibration. A guitar sounds different than a flute, which sounds different than a trumpet, which sounds different than a voice. This is the timbre of a sound. There's a direct relationship between the shape of the sound wave created by a vibration and a timbre. Pitch is how low or high a note is. Most of music theory in the Western tradition deals with pitch because the relationship between different notes is very complex and involves mathematical ratios that determine how the difference in frequency between each note. An octave is when you double the frequency of a note. So this frequency is at a 2-to-1 ratio with this frequency. The low E string on a guitar, that sound, vibrates at about 40 hertz. That's 40 vibrations per second. If I double it to 80 hertz, we have our octave. We call octaves by the same letter name. So this is an E, F, G, G, A, B, C, D, E. In the Western tradition, we split our octave up into 12 different pieces called the chromatic scale. Now, originally, when the ancient Greeks were defining these relationships, they were based on ratios like 3/2 for the fifth, or 4/3 for the fourth. But as our instruments became more and more complex and we wanted to do certain things on a piano, like playing different keys, we dropped what's called just intonation that uses specific ratios like that, because there would be different size pieces in the chromatic scale. Instead, we wanted equally sized semitones or half steps, so that we could play not only a C to C and it sound good, but also a C sharp to a C sharp and a D to sound good. Although octaves probably sound the same. So we wanted to be able to play C to G and have it sound good. But also D to A and have it sound good. So instead of being 3/2 perfectly, we nudged it just a little bit. We tempered out the inconsistencies, and we have something called equal temperament, because now each of these parts are equidistant from one another to get the chromatic scale. But why was I calling this a fifth if it's the eighth in a chromatic scale? Well, all of our intervals, or the spaces in between notes, are labeled based on the major scale. You can derive the major scale from the chromatic scale by using this pattern. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. A half step, like I said, is just one little step in the chromatic scale. A whole step is when you skip one. Right? So let's take C major, really our home base most of the time, and write it out. C, we need a whole step, so we go to D, another whole step to E, and a half step to F, whole step to G, whole step to A, whole step to B, whole step to C. You might have been wondering why there wasn't a note in between E and F or B and C, and that's why, to facilitate the C major scale. That's going to sound like this. The chromatic scale sounds like this. The chromatic scale theoretically goes on infinitely down or up, so I can only play so low on the guitar, but even when you get to C, and again, I can only play so high on a guitar. The major scale can span multiple octaves. Somewhere in there, ran out of room. We can use this pattern and apply it to any of the 12 different notes of the chromatic scale, and we'll end up with 12 different major scales. For instance, let's take F. And F gives us a great example, too, of using flats. C major has no sharps or flats. The notes in between what we call the natural notes are either sharp or flat. And let's find out why. So if we start on F, we need a whole step to G, whole step to A. Now we need a half step. So we don't need to go all the way to B. We need to go to this next note in between A and B. But it would be very weird if we used F, G, A sharp, C, right? So we're going to use B flat because we want to use each of the letters in each of our major scales. F, G, A, B. And then a whole step to C, a whole step to D, a whole step to E, and a half step to F. And we're home. So F major has one flat. Each of the major scales has a certain number of sharps or flats. Let's do one more example to look at some sharps. How about B? B, we need a whole step. Remember that this continues infinitely in either direction. So when I go this way and come out over here, remember that's what I'm doing. So a whole step from B, we need a C sharp. And a whole step up from that is D sharp. Then we need a half step, that's E. Whole step to F sharp. Whole step to G sharp. A whole step to A sharp. And then a half step, we're back to B. So that scale has a whole lot of sharps in it, right? Now each of the major scales will sound similar due to this pattern of intervals or spaces between the notes. C major, F major, and B major. This is called the circle of fourths, or the circle of fifths, depending on which way you're going. If you go this way, it's fourths. F is the fourth of C. C, D, E, F. B flat is the fourth of F. F, G, A, B flat, right? Going the other way, we have fifths. G is the fifth of C, right? C, D, E, F, G. D is the fifth of G. G, A, B, C, D. This circle gives us a few shortcuts to finding out some information about the major scales. One major bit of knowledge is how many flats are in each key signature. In F, you saw that there was one flat. In B flat, there's two flats. In E flat, three flats, etc. as we go around. And over here, same goes for sharps. 1, 2 sharps, until we get to the 5 sharps that we saw in B. Here, F sharp has 6 sharps in it, and G flat has 6 flats in it. So you might see a major scale, you might see either major scale in certain situations. But this also tells us the order of flats and sharps. So we know now that E flat has 3 flats, but what are the 3 flats in E flat? Now we could take and do our whole half again. E flat, whole step to F, whole step to G, half step to A flat, whole step to B flat, whole step to C, whole step to D, half step to E flat. And you can see that there's 1, 2, 3 flats. And now I know that it's E flat, A flat, and B flat. But I could also figure that out using this circle. Flats start at B and go this way, still going around the circle of fourths, right? B, E, and A. 1, 2, 3, B, E, and A. Nice. The 5 sharps in B start at F and go that way. So in B, we should have an F sharp, a C sharp, a G sharp, a D sharp, and an A sharp. And as I write it out, I assure you that that is what we have in B, in B major. So you can already see how complicated pitch becomes in Western music theory. We need to worry about 12 different notes and organizing them into major scales that have 7 notes each, or other scales such as the pentatonic scales that have 5 notes each. I'm going to stick with talking about the major scales right now. And we're going to use the major scales as we start to talk about melody and harmony. But first, let's talk about rhythm for a while. So, if you were to see some sheet music in standard notation, you would see a time signature. Most often that time signature is going to be 4/4. The top number here is how many per measure there are. Let's write 2 measures right here. And the bottom number is what kind. So how many of what kind of note. So this 4 means a quarter note. So we have 4 quarter notes. Per measure. So if I was going to play this, I would choose a tempo, which is how fast our beat goes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not a very interesting little melody there, right? Not a very interesting rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what we got. But we can multiply and subdivide these notes. If maybe we want to play a note that's 2 beats long, we'd use a half note. So you can see why these are called quarter notes, because in common time, or the most common time signature, a quarter note takes up 1/4 of the measure. A half note takes up half of the measure. A whole note would take up the whole measure. Whole note just looks like a circle. And eighth notes take up 1/8 of the measure, or half of a beat in 4/4. And just like how I'm going to focus on major scales during this presentation, I'm going to focus on 4/4 time. Although there are other time signatures like 6/8. And what would that mean? It means that per measure there are 6 eighth notes. They're really weird time signatures that you can create only with computers too. But let's not get into that. So rhythm is how we organize notes into time, using our beats and using a time signature to count. So it's important for musicians when they're playing music to count. Here we want to be counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And sometimes you need to count subdivisions, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? Sometimes the divisions get even faster than that. But when you start to choose pitches from the major scale or from other scales, you organize those pitches into a rhythm using different durations of notes, as outlined by quarter notes, half notes, etc. So let's take a major scale. I'm going to choose the easiest one. C major. So this is a C major scale written out on the musical staff. Just like our time signature gave us some information about the time, our clef tells us what our notes are. This is called a G clef because it swishes around this G line. So this is a G, which means this is an F, E, D, C, right? You might know this by its more common name, the treble clef, but it's called the G clef because it's giving us that information that that's G. Now that we've talked about a scale or a major scale, let's go ahead and write that. Now that we've talked about a scale and a time signature and different durations of notes, we can start to write our melody up on this staff. I'm going to write the melody in the key of C major, so it's easy for us to think about. We don't have to use any sharps or flats. Now our key signature is usually told to us right here, like our time signature tells us how our measures are divided up. Our key signature tells us what key we're in. So if we were in G major, you would see a little sharp there, or if we were in D major, you might see two sharps. The amount of sharps or flats in your key signature tells you what major scale you're using. And your key signature kind of is the paints on your palette that you can choose to paint with. These are the notes that I can select from when I'm writing a melody or a harmony. So I'm going to start writing a little melody using those notes. This is what I've got. Let's hear it. I think it's pretty good. All right. So that's our melody. Our melody has a certain rhythm to it, right? Based on our beat. I didn't count off our beat, but our beat was right about here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have our melody having a certain rhythm to it. Now I want to add harmony. So I want to use some chords. Chords are groups of 3 notes or more played at the same time. Harmony is just the relationship of multiple notes played together. So you could have an A and a C played together. That's harmonized, but if we added an E here, it'd be a nice chord. So we make chords up, usually, I want to preserve that melody so I don't forget it. Most chords are tertiary, which means they're built up in thirds. Just like we had half steps or whole steps, those were actually different types of seconds. You can have a minor second, which is a half step or a semitone, or a major second, which, just like the second in a major scale, is a whole step. Same thing with thirds. We can have a major third, which is made up of 2 whole steps, or a minor third, like from D to F, which is a whole step and a half step. Major third, minor third. So as we begin stacking thirds, we get chords. So C, E, G, that's a C major chord. Chords with 3 notes in them are called triads. Most triads are made up of the 1, 3, and 5. I'm saying that in relation to the major scale, right? A 1, a 3, and a 5 has to do with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the major scale. If you just say 3, you're assuming that it's a major third. But let's look at a D chord, what a D chord would look like in C major. So D, F, and A, right? D in its third and an A. We already know that this is a minor third. We'll put a little M there. And so this is a D minor chord. So, with a D minor, we have a 1, a minor 3, and a 5. A 5 is made up of a minor third plus a major third. So if we look here, we have a major third from C to E. E to G is going to be a minor third. If we have a minor third from D to F, this A, or the 5, is going to be a major third away from F. Which it is. F to G is a whole step, and G to A is a whole step. There is one more quality of chord. Quality is the word that describes whether it's major or minor, or diminished. Triads diatonic to a major scale. Diatonic, another fancy word for just in the key of, using the notes of. This quality of chord has, again, remember the scale goes on in each direction and we want thirds, but this has a 1, a minor third, and a diminished fifth. It's just a flat 5, or comes up just a little bit short because it's a minor third plus a minor third. So because major scales are derived using the same pattern of whole steps or half steps, meaning the intervals in between the notes are the same spaces away, the intervals of the triads will be the same, meaning that the quality of the triads in a harmonized major scale will be the same, will be in the same order. In other words, we could write out the chords for each of the notes in a C major scale. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, whoops, diminished, major. it's the same for all keys, so we could use the universal key if we wanted to think about it universally. And that's just writing them with Roman numerals to reference. So, we don't need to know that for this though. For our purposes today, we're just going to use the harmonized C major scale. So, what we want to do when we're writing a song for classical guitar, which I haven't forgotten, that's what this whole thing is about. We're arranging a song for classical guitar. We need to use the chords that are diatonic or in the key of the same key that we wrote our melody with. Unless we want to get really weird with it. But no, we want to keep it simple today. So I want to use some of these chords in the guitar. I'm going to write them right under here. I have a lot of freedom when it comes to these chords, but usually we always want to end on the one, kind of our home base. You always want to get home in a piece of art, right? And usually our 5 or our 7 gives us a lot of drama. And with art, we like our drama to happen. Everything climaxes and then boom, everything's okay. Real life might not work that way, but we like our art to work that way. So I'm going to go ahead and use the 5 right here. Before that, we might use a 2. And here I'm just going for it. I didn't use one of these. I'm going to use G here, and I'm actually going to use B here. So, here, I'm using triads, and I'm going to use certain voicings for them on the guitar so I can play them. The guitar was designed to play chords. And let me go through these chords. F major, G major, A minor, ooh, got sad, E minor, D minor, B diminished, and then C. A lot of drama in that B diminished. It's like super minor. Drama. But then everything worked out. We're happy. We're safe. So, that's a pretty nice chord progression if you ask me. Now let's think about the rhythm of that chord progression I just played. I'm playing each chord for 2 beats each. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Where they fit into the strong beats of our measures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see why they're strong. It's a very regular pattern. Some songs use upbeats. Most songs with a drum set, the snare is playing the upbeat. Cat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that adds some syncopation or some accenting of irregular beats. It's normal for chords to be played on the strong beats of a measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my job, because I'm arranging this for solo guitar, is to take that melody and play it over the chords. I need to play that over. Let's try it. It was pretty close. So that's a pretty simple melody, but maybe you want to make a longer one with more chords, with thicker harmonies, more complex harmonies, using more than just the 3-note triads to add more color and a different scales in the major scale, and you might end up with some jazz. Something like that. So, this has been my music theory lesson. I hope you can see how melody and harmony and rhythm fit together to make a piece of music, however short. And remember that every single note that I played, that note, is just a vibration that is holding everything together in a certain way. It might seem that there's space between me and the camera that I'm talking at right now, but that space is filled with air that's vibrating due to my voice or my guitar playing. So all across the world, we are all experiencing similar vibrations. Our hearing range is pretty much the same, from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So, treat each other like you have similar hearing ranges, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And pick up an instrument and try and write something. And as you write a piece of music, you don't have to think about the timbral complexities of different shapes of sound waves that you're creating. As you do it, you can just think about music. All right. Thanks for joining me. Again, my name is Sam Irvin, and I'm here with Leaf. Take care. Bye-bye.